Let's talk about setting up a new product code on your Spyder 200i. When you have a new product code, like any case packer, your best choice is to start with a product code that's very similar. So if you have one that's a single row, if you need to run a single row, pick a single row. If you're running a multi-row, pick a multi-row. Large bags, pick a large bags. So in this case, what we would do is, let's say you had a 1.5 ounce 36 count, similar to the 30 count, but you would have one more layer. So what you would do is go through and you would copy an existing recipe, and it walks you right through it. You select the recipe and you paste it into a new location. Once you have that new location, now you can adjust parameters as necessary. So what you're going to do is, this one is the case, so adjust your case dimensions, length, width, and height, and case code as necessary. I think for this customer, they're all the same case size. Loading RAM, everything is calculated. There is a little bit of an offset of well, the load position actually, you probably shouldn't have to change. You may have to make small adjustments to that. And then the load RAM position for tipping. What that does is, if you push out to the load position 745 and you want to start tipping sooner, you put this number a little smaller. So especially with small bags, can be very tricky that are not tight in the case. You may have to adjust the loading position to get the timing right so that a case will tip down and bags not fall out. Case tipper, you work that in accordance with the loading RAM to, your tipper out delay, down delay, up delay. Again, I would not change these unless you have a problem, and then only change one at a time. Flap catcher. Flap catcher, you should not have to change any of these. There may be circumstances where you have a new case where you don't want to use the flap catcher, and there will be a button here to disable the flap catcher. So we've talked about the case. Now the bag. Adjust the bag size, the length and width. The length, we take that and we figure out how fast to run your belts. So it's pretty important, and it's used to calculate where the robot goes to pick. Width, also where the robot goes to pick. Seal check, when you're running, there's some laser offsets. If your bag isn't in the collect window properly, you can make some adjustments to that, and we'll get to that later. Bag min, bag difference, number of rejects allowed before the machine shuts down, all pretty standard stuff if you've already had a seal check, which I believe you do. When adjusting the seal checker timing, you will go to the screen that says seal check trend, and what you want to do is make sure that this rectangular is the window which we're looking at the bag, and the other pattern is the actual analog signal from the seal check, that the peak of the analog signal is somewhere in that window. So this is sensor 1 and sensor 2. So in both cases, you see the peak inside these rectangular windows, and that's how you make sure that the seal check is properly timed. So this one is for speeds of conveyors. So in-feed conveyor will actually go away. There'll be an acceleration conveyor and the vacuum motor. So a lot of times you can lower the vacuum motor percentage to just enough you need to pick the bags and no more, and it will save your vacuum pump life by not overheating the vacuum pump. Pick and place. The picking and placing is automatically calculated based on your bag dimensions and your bag height. So it's possible you may have to do nothing at all. If it's not picking exactly where you want, there's some offsets in the X, the Y, and the Z positions. So you can offset here. If the pick isn't quite right, there'll be some arrows in the machine in addition to what's on the screen that show you the X, Y, and Z position. There's also the retreat offset, and what that is once you pick, a lot of times you don't want to disturb the bag that's next to it that you're picking. So when you retreat, you'll move in the X direction approximately 100, 150 millimeters to not disturb that bag, and you may come upwards 90 or 100 millimeters to get out of the way. Some other adjustments you would have to make, the case, pack pattern, how many layers. In the example that we said, if we were going to do 1.5 36 count, instead of 5 layers, now you'd have 6 layers, picking 6 bags and 1 row. The layer height is used for the robot placing. So when the robot places, if you're pushing too hard on the bags when you place, you can adjust that layer height there, and or conversely, if you're too high, you can lower that. Bags per case is the 5 times 6 is 30. The bags per case is pretty important because we use that to estimate when to shut down the machine. Layer parameters. If for some reason you wanted to offset your layers when you place them, you could go through each layer and X, Y, and Z modify how you're going to place them in the cassette. Typically, it's not even necessary to adjust that, but it's there if you need it. This is for the Smart Track or the indexing belt. Typically indexing speed, XL, decel, I would leave the same. Index delay, that may have to be adjusted. Number of pockets is the number of pockets for the entire indexing belt. So if you have an indexing belt with 16 pockets, there's 2 belts, 16 times 2, you'd put 32 in there. Flight offset, when you start the machine, the bag doesn't fall into the pocket. When you bring it in, you can offset the flight in order to put the pocket where you need to have it. Belt ID and backstop ID are your change parts. These are changeover positions. So throughout the whole machine, we've got in-feed bag guide positions, seal check height, Excel belt guides, backstop position, and that backstop position should always be the bag length because the Delta goes ahead and uses that as a pick position anyway. Tipper case in position, where your tipper is going to be, your case width, and your case indexer position. If you're not sure where any of these are, just press the button and a